Hello, and welcome to the Thinking Elixir podcast, where we cover the news of the community and learn from each other. My name is Mark Erickson.
And I'm David Bernheisel.
Let's jump into the news. First up, we're going to cover a little bit of housekeeping. So just want to make sure that you are aware that we are also on YouTube. So the episodes that we're recording for the podcast are also being published to a YouTube channel. We've got a link to that in the show notes. It's at Brainlid, which is my avatar name everywhere. And it's just the two of us as talking heads, so you're not going to get any like diagrams or anything else out of it. But if you prefer video and YouTube to just audio, then we want to make sure that you are aware of it. And we have a link to that. And we're also releasing those on social media, linking to those videos as well.
It's good to see those facial expressions every once in a while.
And we're a bit more recognizable when you find us at a conference, you know.
But for the most part, yeah, there's no additional visual aids, just lots of hand expressions. All right. So you can always find us there if that's your preferred stream of content. Our little talking heads will start showing up over there. All right. Well, moving on. We've talked about Bluesky before and Twitter, right? And I think our recent discoveries or realizations is that Bluesky seems to be the place to be now, especially when we're talking about, what was the quote I said? It was like, Bluesky feels like what tech Twitter did back in the day, right? So if you're looking for tech cohorts, tech friends, that kind of stuff, evenly heeled kind of folks, Bluesky seems to be the place to be. It's a tiny bit different from Twitter. And one of those differences about Bluesky is that there is a concept called starter packs, which is fantastic, especially for folks that are starting to, discover Bluesky for themselves. Starter packs are just basically like lists. Twitter has lists of people too. I never really used them, but starter packs are generally for like, I am just now getting onto the platform. I don't know who to follow, and who you're following and all that kind of stuff kind of informs its algorithms and stuff. You do get to choose how content is kind of displayed to you, but one of those ways is just based on who you're following. And so, well, to have any like meaningful content on Bluesky, you kind of have to follow people. So that's what starter packs is about. So people can publish starter packs to kind of give you a head start on following like-minded folks. And some of those like-minded folks are just like Elixir developers, Beam related, developers, that kind of stuff. So, all right, all that is context to understand what a starter pack is. And so Peter Ulrich has put together a blog post explaining how to move to Bluesky, and also provides around 3 different starter packs of Elixir and Beam related, folks. Mark and I are on some of those lists, so you should find us in some of those starter packs. We got a list. We got a link to Peter Ulrich's blog post, Peter Ulrich's list, another Peter's list, and Ryan Winchester's starter pack. Like, there's lots of them. You'll be able to find them. And so if you hit follow all on that list, it's just a one-time thing. More people will be added to your following list, and as you learn who they are, it's always up to you on whether to unfollow or follow more people. Yeah, and that stuff kind of evolves. Alongside of that, I should mention there's also another kind of feed that Noah Betson, I think, puts together. This feed is listening to the fire hose of all content out there on Bluesky, and it uses a regex on the content there to look for certain hashtags, certain topics, that kind of stuff. And that feed will also it's not person based, it's content based, is what I'm saying. It's inexact because who knows, anybody can kind of get in there and start saying the words Elixir and stuff like that. But it's smart. It's smartly tuned to be fairly specific and fairly accurate. So there is that feed as well, and we'll have a link to that feed.
I'd mentioned before that I had set up a Bluesky account way back when the initial buzz was around it, and then it was just like it was crickets, right? There was nothing happening over there, so I just stopped posting or even visiting. And then it's been more recently, right, that we've been seeing this major uptick. I saw recently they passed 15 million users, which is like an incredible, crazy hockey stick adoption. And with all of this stuff, like David, I noticed that your account was using your personal domain as your account. And that's something you couldn't do on Twitter. And so I looked into that and I was like, oh, I could do that too. And so actually Peter has his own little, in his blog post, he details how to do that. But it's really easy if you control a domain, so you can put in some, special host text entries on your domain DNS, then you can also get your own domain as part of your authenticated handle. That's really cool. So yeah, I've done that with the Thinking Elixir one too.
Yeah, that's I imagine that's twofold. Personalization, first of all, of course, it's always cool to have your own personal brand. The second one is verification.
Yes.
So Twitter had a huge issue when Musk took over that blue check mark was so sacred, right? And it was just originally intended to just say that this is a verified true account. We know who they are. That meaning kind of went away into whoever wants to pay for it. Yep. It's just not great news for authenticity. So you can imagine how some corporations with their own handle think news organizations like NPR or something. So NPR could theoretically, if they choose to do this, much like the Fediverse could do this on Mastodon, but Bluesky has their version of it. The NPR could create handles for all of their known, legit, verified, reporters. So you can have trust that the content that's coming out of that domain is actually them, which is nice.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And just to make it clear on those lists that we have links to, you can just scan through the list and just browse and say, oh, follow. You can pick and choose like that, or you can just say follow all. And then as the content comes in, you're like, oh, I don't really care to see all of their food pictures, or something like that. You can totally adjust it as you go. But the one thing to make sure you realize is if you do a follow all, it's not going to automatically continue to add people to your account as it's added to the list, right? It's a one-time operation. So just to be aware of that. So as more people come onto the platform, it might be worth revisiting those lists and just seeing, oh, who else is on here that's joined recently that I haven't seen yet and I haven't followed.
So, all right. Well, just to recap quickly, a lot of Elixir folks are there. There's a lot of good Elixir content over there now. Personally, I'm not posting or listening to Twitter anymore. So if you want to reach out to me, you got to do it through Bluesky nowadays, and or traditional email. It's just fine too. And I suspect that a lot of other folks will end up on Bluesky as well, just judging from the hockey stick kind of growth.
A little bit more direct Elixir. Next up, José shared a hot take about Kubernetes. Okay, so maybe it's not 100% Elixir, because this is all about Kubernetes too. But what he said, and I love this hot take because he wasn't trying to be controversial. He's just trying to make a point. And like anything, anytime you say anything on the internet, someone's going to have a knee-jerk reaction in the opposite direction, no matter what it is. So it's fun because I think this is an interesting topic to talk about because it highlights what Elixir and the Beam are really good at, and some ways that those qualities are overlooked or not appreciated. So what he said was, saying you don't need Erlang or Elixir because you have Kubernetes is like saying you don't need to restart applications. You will just shut your whole machine off and on. I love that, because like that's something anyone who's, has a computer is like, you know what that feels like, right? So I did want to highlight, I'm quite familiar with Kubernetes, and it does do great at solving some big problems, particularly when you have mixed environments. Like I've got Ruby and Rails over here in this service. I've got an Elixir service. I've got a Java service and all that kind of stuff. And in one big organization, and they want one simple way to manage all of it. Kubernetes makes that a whole lot easier because you're just kind of abstracting away the pieces, putting them into pods, and you can control the rollouts and the DNS for the services to connect with each other. It's great at that. So it's not saying Kubernetes is bad. He said, some are reading this as Kubernetes is unnecessary. Well, you do need something to manage and deploy your servers, be it Kubernetes or something else. It is specifically against the claim that fault tolerance and concurrency in Kubernetes replaces all others. So that's what I really wanted to dig into. Because when we're talking about concurrency, it's like you're saying there's a lot of concurrency primitives and features in these languages like Elixir, Go, Java, Rust, whatever. It's like you're saying, well, I don't need the concurrency in the language because I'm just going to spawn up more pods and nodes and let Kubernetes handle it. So then it's like if you had a, single-threaded Rails or JavaScript node application, right? And it's like, I'll just get more concurrency by having more instances, as opposed to actually having concurrency in the application. And so like that's what he's pushing back against, right? That people are saying, I'm going to let Kubernetes solve that problem for me instead of taking advantage of and using the language itself to do that. So the point that I wanted to make sure people appreciate and understand is that Elixir really gives you the ability for a single process, which is the concurrency and the parallel part, right? Like if I have multiple cores, I've got parallelism going on. It allows for a single process to fail and restart, or because of supervisor strategies, I can even have whole groups of processes restart properly without harming my application while it's running. That's the kicker, right? And the Kubernetes comparison is to restart the entire application if there was an unhandled error, right? Something crashed, it crashes the entire app because it was unhandled, restart the whole thing. Well, any other users that are in that server, in that application instance, they're going to feel that somehow. It's going to impact their experience. And the idea with Elixir is like, hey, I can really narrow that focus to who's impacted. So all the other users that are on my application, on my server, they don't even know this is happening. They don't even know this part of the system has been restarted. It's just that whole idea that, it can self-heal from many types of issues. That is like so incredibly cool. And you just don't get that at the Kubernetes level. Now, still, you want something to manage your application, to get it deployed, to keep it up, because if you do have catastrophic errors, like, oh, I've lost my database connection, the whole app will go down, right? By default. So yes, there's still a place for Kubernetes. It's not to say it's worthless, it shouldn't be used. It's to say, use it for what it's good at, but don't use that in place of what Elixir gives you with this fine-grained process control and restart ability, the healing, and the concurrency. That's just so powerful.
Right.
If you want to go a little bit more on that, the Dashbit blog has an older blog post from, I think, 2019, where they talk about Kubernetes and the Erlang VM as orchestration on large scale and small scale views. So that's something totally worth checking out.
All right, moving on. Because SavvyCal is updating their Phoenix adapter that pairs with Inertia JS to 1.0. So it's just a milestone. It's worth mentioning because 1.0 is generally, the signal for stability. And in case you don't know what Inertia JS is, Inertia JS is a kind of a framework. It's a framework of building single-page applications in React, Vue, whatever you want, without building that API layer in between, that tedious layer in between. So in principle, it's kind of attacking that same problem that LiveView does, just does it more traditionally, in my opinion, with typical React and Vue frameworks. So the example is that you can have a user's controller in whatever backend framework you're using, PHP, for example, or even Phoenix. And in this case, this is the Phoenix adapter for it. So you'd still have your controller there, and it would still give you, it would still do the usual business logic, but it has the glue that communicates with what Inertia JS on the client side can expect. So that way you just skip the whole defining all the things 3 times, right? My backends, my API, and then what it needs to look like. So SavvyCal started and contributed and maintains the Phoenix piece of the Inertia ecosystem. And that's the part that is hitting 1.0. So it's currently in beta releases. So if you are currently using that, you should go check out those beta releases. There are a couple of breaking changes because this is a major version bump. But I imagine, I don't currently use it, but I imagine that the breaking changes there are just the opportunities to clean up the stuff from figuring out things, just making it work. So that's 1.0, and that's the Phoenix adapter of Inertia JS. We got a link in the show notes to go check that out.
And next up, Gleam version 1.6.0 final was released. So last episode, we talked about how they had a release candidate. So it's now a final and published. Just wanted to hit on some of the big main sections that were in the changelog. There's a blog post that goes along with this. We have a link to that in the show notes. But just some of the big things were context-aware errors, and this was all credited to being with the static type system, being able to get that level of detail and really good error messages being improved there. And then context-aware editing hovering, added a annotations code action. That's part of that language server integration, I believe. Then Erlang compilation daemon. I think that's some of the stuff we've seen in Elixir too, where you're running the compilation daemon with the locking feature. So you're not getting, lock contention for trying to, who's all compiling the code base at the same time. And then there's a variant interface, precise dependency updates, result handling hints, optional dependencies are now in fact optional, and optimized bit arrays. There's a number of other things too. So congratulations on another release. That's exciting.
All right, revisiting a little bit of last week's news about LiveView consolidating the interpolation syntax. Okay, so just a reminder, we've kind of have two ways to interpolate stuff in HEEX templates. You've got the traditional EEX one, which is that angle bracket % equals, and then whatever you want, and then % right angle bracket to close. That's one. Everyone knows about that one for a long time.
It's the way it's always been.
It's the way it's always been, yeah. And now we've got the more modern curly bracket syntax, and HEEX introduced this to the Elixir ecosystem by way of that's how you interpolate into like attributes in an HTML-ish kind of tag, right? And so in HEEX templates, we have a bunch of functional components. Those functional components, the syntax is just to do the HTML-like, syntax, the left angle bracket, my module, or a dot function, and then all the attributes in there, which gets fed into your Phoenix Live component at that point, or functional component. So that's the basis, right? That's the starting point. And so there was a bit of talking in the community. It was just like, man, I would really love to just have one way of doing things. And quite honestly, the angle bracket % stuff is just a little tougher to type, a little bit more tedious. Not that anyone's really complaining or getting killed over this, but but it's a little bit more modern, I think, nowadays to do the curly brackets. And so last week, we just said there was a PR open that kind of explores this and asks the question and proves that it could work. That PR, I'm not sure what happened to it, but doesn't matter at this point because there's a new PR that actually does it. So, so it looks like we are moving forward with consolidating the interpolation syntax in HEEX templates. Bonus points here. Mix format recently in newer versions of Elixir gain this ability to autocorrect, fix, they call it -- migrate existing code into this new pattern, and this is included in that. It looks like that's what I'm seeing out of the PR. So there is an option in the HTML formatter mix format plugin, that's Phoenix LiveView kind of ships with that, and when you generate a Phoenix project, it kind of scaffolds that for you. So that's generally default. So if you're using the HTML formatter mix format plugin, you'll see this, and I think you're gonna gain this ability by default. So there is a flag that says migrate EEX to curly brackets, and it's if I recall correctly, defaulted to true. So all right, flashbacks to leaks and all of these other changes that Phoenix LiveView has changed, right? Like, I remember all the tedious work that it goes into just updating the syntax of something to be something, whatever the new flavor is. And it's for good reason, good reason, but nonetheless tedious. Well, it looks like we won't have to deal with that this time around. Thank goodness. So we can let Mix upgrade to the new syntax for us. Large code bases are probably going to want to add that to the git ignore list. So that one poor person that actually commits that doesn't get blamed for everything. But yeah, very happy to see that that's the direction that we're going. Consolidating the syntax, easy upgrade path. All that sounds like great news to me.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about mixed format. I don't have a good sense of where people have ended up, like the adoption within the community. Are a lot of people universally using mixed format to format their code? Because I remember when it first came out, it was being tweaked, right? As it was different versions of Elixir would come out, the formatter would be tweaked and change a little bit. And there were some people like, oh, I hate the way it formats this. And so sometimes people were just opting to manually format stuff. So I'm just curious, are you, dear listener, one of those manual formatters, or are you running the formatter that's built in? Because, when you start talking about building in migrations built into this tool, I certainly want that. So I would think that that would be a very compelling reason to just adopt the formatting, if even if it's not with 100% the way you'd like to tweak your code. And next up, another livebook improvement has landed thanks to Alex Kutmos and Jonathan Kwosko. So the goal appears to have been to allow Vega-like graphics, like that's charts and graphics and things like that can be generated in your livebook, which is super great, but allowing those to be exported in different image formats. So the project was previously apparently using an NPM library to support that. And with this change, it's being shifted to a Rust NIF. That actually been merged now. It's merged into Livebook, which is very cool. So it'll be interesting just to see, when you go and do your next Livebook update, the compilation of that Rust NIF might be happening at some point. So it might just change the way the update and the setup of Livebook works, but it should be faster, more reliable. And one of the things I think you might benefit from a developer perspective is avoiding the NPM churn that might be otherwise present in some of those libraries. And just saying, we don't really want to be relying on that because we don't have to. We can rely on this other way of doing it, which is faster, more performant, and maybe more reliable as well. So anyway, I just thought that was really neat. Love seeing continual expanded developments in Livebook.
All right. You remember how we just talked about Kubernetes in a bunch? All right. We're going to go back to deployments a bit. So Parker Selbert of OpenFame shared on Twitter that he transitioned an application that he uses entirely out of I don't know who said the cloud, but out from a typical cloud solution to a self-hosted solution, and shared some of the benefits. So we got a couple of links to his tweets that give some details. But here's some of the stats that he shared. He said that his new solution is 11% of the total annual cost. Huge. It gives him 12 times more CPU and 16 times more RAM. Way cool. So about 10% of the cost, but like 10x, more than 10x, like the resources you get. So yes, please. 0% shared resources with noisy neighbors. Those dang neighbors. I presume this is, yeah. I presume this is about like the typical containerization, right? So
yeah, on shared hosts, yeah.
Right. Runs a bunch of different containers. You never know where you are in relation to that, I guess. So yeah, I guess you can like liken it to an apartment building, right? Mm-hmm. All right, another stat is that 100% control over the machine, the database, and the network, which for Parker's probably great news. For some other folks, probably they don't want that.
Well, one of the things you say there is 100% control means 100% responsibility.
Yeah, that's the. But hey, that's pretty cool though.
Yes, it is.
Because when you need it, you need it, and you don't want to be roadblocked by that, right?
Yes.
And then finally, deployment is about 4 times faster thanks to the Elixir releases without the containerization part of it. So all of that and the entire setup and deploy, like kind of off script, weighs in at about 200 lines of code, which is pretty darn good. Mm-hmm. Compare that to about just ballparking here, 3 trillion lines of Kubernetes code.
all the YAML, yes.
Yeah, so many YAMLs. So he even shared that it's purpose built. He admits, right, but he did share what that deployment script looks like.
At least a piece of it, like the deployment script portion of it, yeah.
Right, and so we got a link to that screenshot as well, so you can glean what you want out of that. But here's the idea: is that it's using Docker buildx to build. You feed in a couple flags. You have an output here to your local machine, I presume, and then you rsync that like. Good old rsync, just old school rsync, up to wherever your host is. So you've got traditional SSH keys, I reckon. So you rsync it up there, and then you tell your host to the systemd, go restart my apps that are up there. And I'm missing a bit of context here, but Parker does say that there is a rolling release here, so there is no downtime. So I'm not sure where that's quite handled. I don't think it's systemd. It might be a layer above. I'm not sure, but. It does appeal to like my duct tape bubblegum kind of like approach to deploying things, but using modern tools. So I like this. It's like a good intersection of using good tools with the simplicity of just a machine out in the world, right? So my only contention is that that is the cloud. that it's not my machine, right?
Exactly.
That's somebody else's machine that's in the cloud. Just maybe not a big abstraction, where I can't simply SSH into it.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is it feels like this has been part of the whole trend where there's is kind of seemed to be kicked off a lot by DHH, David Hannemeyer Hansen, Ruby and Rails fame, right? Just kind of pushing back against the big hosting companies like AWS, Azure, GCC, right? Because when AWS got started, you had an EC2 instance and you had that little machine. It might be a virtual machine or you might reserve a large full machine, but it was very much tied to the machine or the VM. And over time, it's just become many layers of services. And I think there's been a large pushback because of that, because the costs are really hard to project when you have all these layers and, you also need this little tool. Oh, you also need this layer and this service. And then you're like, how much is this going to cost me? And then people are feeling a little bit burned out, I think. So it feels like this is part of that resistance, right? That the whole pendulum swing that seems to happen. So I think it's interesting, right? It's an anecdotal point of, hey, here are some of the types of benefits you can see. I still think this is probably in a data center. So it's not like self-hosted on-prem, right? The way lots of systems have been in the past. It's still someone else's machine, unless you're going and racking it yourself and you have to go in and change the NIC card when it blows and do that yourself.
Right.
Then unless you're doing that, then it's still someone else's machine, but it's a different level of the cloud, right? From what it's become to be today.
Yeah, it's one of those fast-moving lower clouds that you can that you can really see, instead of not those stratosphere AWS clouds up there, that planes don't even, I guess planes are over all the clouds, right? Yeah, I guess they're all high enough. Physics. Okay. Well, hey, maybe enough deployment stories today, but that was pretty cool, pretty good stats that Parker shared there. And just to kind of connect back to the Kubernetes story, right? Like Elixir really does have like some great unique abilities that really make this kind of deployment style shine. If you're not so tied to Kubernetes styles of deployment, and your cloud provider sometimes like kind of forces you, and they, depending on the solution you choose with them, they kind of force you into that path. If you have just a bare metal kind of deployment, greenfield baseline here, then you can really set up all of the concurrency, all of the distribution stuff, and just make that work. The point still remains that deployment, maintenance, and resilience are key success factors in all of this kind of stuff. So, take your trade-offs, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Fly has a incredible developer experience, but reliability is not 100% there, and if I just want a CLI to like go host me a Phoenix application and I want to pay this much, that's a great experience. If you know a little bit more around your way of systemd and some bare metal, kind of stuff, because you've been a developer for 30 years and you've definitely dealt with Linux before, like this is going to be more comfortable for you. And there are good modern intersections of that good old simple in quotation marks here, but good old simple times with modern tooling.
I guess one point I just also want to make is when you start talking about like these smaller instances or self-controlled hardware kind of setups, that's really going back to Erlang's history, right? It was developed to be run on geographically disparate, like not actively being maintained little routers that are routing phone calls, right?
Yeah, commodity hardware.
It's kind of what Nerves has kind of grown out of some of that, right? But it's like these were devices, right? So you're not being able to just go out and easily maintain this at any given time. So resilience was key. Being able to manage them remotely was important, that they're able to self-heal as much as possible. So those types of features, they really do shine. So like when you're saying, hey, I want to run my application in a different way, some of those other more modern languages, Elixir, we inherit all of that. Yeah, it's more modern than Erlang was, but we are built on it, right? So it's effectively the same thing. But like when you're talking about, JavaScript, Python, Rails, anything like that, it's just fundamentally, they don't have that history. They don't have that consideration of why it was built this way. And so running your application in some of these other ways, I would argue you're even having a better option, a better ability, a better way to do that with Erlang and Elixir. It's just neat to see. It looks like Parker's having a lot of fun with it. We'll see how he ends up going and if he sticks with it. And last up, CodeBEAM Lite in New York just happened. And David, you were able to go to this one. So how was this conference? These smaller conferences are really fun because they're single track. You have an opportunity to get to know more people. So how big was this? What was it like?
First of all, it's amazing. The organizers, did a wonderful job keeping it casual, working, and, vibes are great. Dave Lucia, Sophie DiBenedetto did a great job. Francesco was also there from Erlang Solutions. Yes, highly recommend. It's definitely a different feeling from like the bigger Elixir Conf. And I know that CodeBEAM does have larger settings as well. This one wasn't one. This was CodeBEAM Lite, right? But that 60 to 70 people kind of range, everyone's in the same room. You'll eventually get to talk to everybody if you give everyone the chance, which is really cool. It's just a different experience all the way around. The conference part of that, like the talks, it's pretty cool in that I don't have to make a decision where I'm going. Yeah. I just go, I just show up.
It's not the whole challenge of like, oh, there's two that I want to simultaneneously be in. I can't do both. Yeah. I have to choose. Yeah. You don't have to make that choice.
Yeah. You just go, you're there to be there and you listen, and this year they had some pretty great talks. The Cars folks from Cars Commerce did a wonderful talk on distributed tracing. So they laid that out very well. These talks were not recorded, unfortunately, so I don't think these will end up being published, but I assume that some of these talks will be given again somewhere else at some other point, some version of that. But in particular, the Cars Commerce guys did a really good job with the distributed tracing. Gleam had some great representation there to give you an idea of what a full stack like Gleam web application looks like. So front end to back end, and by front end I mean like
Gleam on the front end, yes.
Yeah, like that front end, and all the way to the usual back end logic and all that kind of stuff. So good to put like a real picture and real code in front of me to understand what this really looks like. In this case, this was demonstrating Luster, so that was really cool. Paolo Valente was there demonstrating. Oh, it's always mind-blowing, the kind of stuff that he does. And I'm going to not do it justice, unfortunately. But the demo was essentially taking a bunch of NX functions of image filtering, image convolutions, as he called it, processing that binary, which is a bunch of matrix math for what it's worth, taking those computations from NX and shipping it to the browser with WebAssembly. Right, so it's just processing on the client side. There's a bit of processing on the backend side as well, but not like the image part of it necessarily. So, or maybe it's both, I forget now. But the ability to do that was just, first of all, mind-blowing. You're compiling WebAssembly, shipping it through LiveView, through a WebSocket to the client, and then the client's executing that WebAssembly to like do the convolution on the image, and then LiveView is showing all of those, all of those transformations like live right there, and sending it back.
That's interesting. It's a different form of distributed computing, right? You're letting the client do some of the heavy lifting.
Right. So there was a lot involved there, and I'm trying to decouple it from like my own conversations with Paulo because I won't spoil it. Dockyard did have a blog post that Paulo Valente wrote that isn't necessarily about his demo, but it's about like NX sharding. So we kind of talked about that last week or a week or two ago. That wasn't necessarily demoed here, but there's just a lot of really sweet things happening in NX. And so this was just another little window of like amazement, of what can happen here. And then he coupled that with LiveView, which was also really cool. There were more talks there, and they were all really great. And again, very simple. Yes, you wake up, you get there, you have your coffee, you go through a couple of talks, you have some breaks, you have some tacos, and then you do another round of that, and then you have dinner with folks, and you're just chatting with people all day, right? And it's very simple, very easy. Brooklyn, by the way, is just where this was hosted this time. Very cool place. I saw loads of kids just, scootering around, going to school, and everything was just in walking distance. It was just another reminder of like, this is not about the conference anymore, but car culture where I'm at. It's just like everywhere. Most of America is like you have to have a car to get anywhere. So anytime I go to a big city and I'm just walking everywhere to get somewhere, I love it. I just love it. And
got to bring some good shoes.
Yes, I bring some good shoes. It's cold up there, from Florida boy here. Definitely have to wear a coat. But anyway, great venue, I guess is the point I'm trying to say. And they did announce they are going to be having that again sometime in the same time frame next year. So they will be coming back to that. Not exactly that venue. Maybe they will, but they will be having it again in New York City next year. So looking forward to that. The cost of the ticket, just as a reminder, for me, I think I got the early bird one was $200. Mm-hmm. So pretty cheap. Most of the cost, I reckon, is just going to be getting there and staying there. But the ticket's probably not going to be the blocker. Let me put it that way. Definitely highly recommend it. And if that's not the location for you, they do have other styles of this, and not even in the CodeBEAM family. There's Gig Elixir too, and there's other conferences on the West Coast. I think CodeBEAM usually leads those as well, but I think they have some other smaller ones, and especially in Europe. So anyway, all this to say, Dave, Sophie, Francesco, you guys did a great job. Love to be there, and I would love to come back. It was, I thought, a great success.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next time on Thinking Elixir.